Bilingual Redditors, what have you heard that you weren't supposed to? Story 1. I used to go to lunch with my assistant manager at a Mexican restaurant next door to where we worked. My assistant manager is Cuban and would usually have small talk in Spanish with the waiters. One day he tells them about how he's the manager and I'm his assistant. This conversation gets more interesting when he tells the waiter about what a lousy worker I am. This is when I interrupted to say, in Spanish, that he, my assistant, is full of shit. And I let them know that I speak Spanish. The waiter laughed his ass off, and my assistant manager was very embarrassed. Story 2. About 10 years ago, I was on a night train going from Rome to Naples. These two addicts were discussing robbing me with a knife while I was sitting in the same cabin with them. I told them I spoke Italian and that if they wanted to rob me, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. They actually apologized, told me they thought I was German, and moved on down the road. Story 3. My dad spoke English and German. While at the zoo when I was a kid, another father and his kid were talking. The kid asked his dad in German why that man, my dad, was walking with a limp. The boy's dad began answering, in German, something along the lines that it was rude to ask such questions. Good thing he didn't understand you. My dad smiled at the boy and in German answered, because I hurt my ankle chasing after a boy who asked rude questions. The boy's dad and my dad had a good laugh. The boy looked subtly chagrined and perhaps he learned a lesson. I ate ice cream. Story 4. I was bringing my child to a French school. The teachers are always talking to one another in French in front of me. Then one day a kid randomly asked me what this was a picture of. I replied, Le Bouffe, which I knew because a street near my house was named that. And then all of a sudden they stopped talking in front of me in French. They all seemed embarrassed or ashamed. It makes me wonder what they were saying before that they thought I didn't speak French. Story 5. When my mom was in her 20s, she was in line at a mall, and she heard two Arabic men behind her making fun of all the slutty American women and talking about her. FYI, she was not dressed badly. She was even super modest by today's standards. But in Saudi Arabia, the women cover everything but their eyes. She grew up in Saudi, so she not only spoke the language, but was very familiar with the beliefs there. She then turned around and chewed them out in Arabic for disrespecting her and told them they should be ashamed for so boldly acting outside of their belief system at the expense of strangers in a country that does not have the same restrictions. Story 6. I was once at a grocery store with my mother, and as we were browsing through the fruits and such, I overheard a conversation between a Hispanic mother and her son. He seemed about 10. His mother was telling him to go to the next aisle and to buy some chips and soda pop so that they would look more American. I felt so bad after hearing that because obviously they were illegal immigrants, and I remembered my mom and brother doing the exact same thing when they came here. They're all citizens now. Story 7. I was on the train in Brisbane on my way home from work, and there were some male French tourists on there, plus the usual gaggle of schoolgirls from the local Catholic schools. The guy started talking and pointing to some of the girls, clearly kids in uniform, and saying some disgusting shit, along the lines of, old enough to F, and I bet that one shaves her you-know-what. Bear in mind that these girls are like in grade 8, 9, so like 13, 14 years old and definitely underage. I was getting increasingly pissed off at the comments and turned to them and yelled, Honte à vous, vieux pervers rampant. Shame on you, creepy old perverts. I've never seen someone look so shocked in my life. They got off at the next stop, but not before practically melting into the walls. Story 8. When I was in middle school, there was a group of kids, like 3 or 4 of them, who would sit in the back of the class and speak in Creole. They were chatting and laughing, but nobody could understand what they said. The teacher would tell them to stop speaking in Creole since she couldn't know if they were saying something offensive, which was usually met with them saying something to each other in an obviously mocking manner, and then the whole group breaking out in laughter. So one day, this guy shows up in the class. He says that he's training to be a teacher and he's going to be shadowing the class that day. So he's sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, jotting things down in a notebook. Of course, the Creole-speaking kids were chatting away as usual. So the guy gets up out of the chair, walks over to this group of Creole-speaking kids who all sat nearby, so I could hear them pretty clearly. The guy leans over to them and very calmly says in plain English, yes, my dick is huge, and no, your hot teacher ain't going to suck yours. By the way, I'm your new English teacher and you've got detention. They never spoke Creole in class again. Story 9. A friend is from Palau, and he had 15 minutes to get coffee and get back to work. A woman cut in front of him in line, which was enough to make it unlikely he'd make it back in time. So he swore at her in his native language. It was basically, F you, don't cut in front of me. But her face went completely white and she ran away screaming in terror about how he'd used a voodoo curse on her. Story 10. In high school, my dad and I went backpacking through the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California. We were in this small town named Lone Pine, which is about 4 hours north of LA. There were tons of German and French tourists there who had been visiting the redwood forests. I speak both English and French fluently, and I overheard these two French girls talking about me in a convenience store. One of them nodded in my direction and said, "What about that one?" To which the other one replied, "He seems kind of dumb, but he's cute, so yeah, I'd probably sleep with him." I thought I would try my luck and approach them about it. In French, I said, "So, I'd like to take you up on that offer if you're up to it." They were clearly pretty embarrassed and just walked away giggling. My dad watched this all go down. He gave me a solid high five afterwards. Story 11. I was in Monaco on a school trip for my French class with some California students. We were ordering food at some small local place when the California students in front of me were trying to order in English only. They were pretty rude and demanding, saying things like, "Oh my God, I just want some ice. Ugh, these people are so dumb." And the French cook was just looking confused, and after a lot of bickering, the California students walked off. Then, when I went to order, I tried to order in French. Not very well, but after 6 years of studying French in high school and elementary school, it was still better than English. I think I said, "Pour j'avais des," when the cook cut me off and went, "Dude, I speak English. Those girls were just assholes. What would you like?" I thought it was awesome. Story 12. In France, Paris, I was traveling with some friends, also Portuguese, and we ordered in English in that restaurant because I'm the only one who understands a bit of French in the group. And since we saw other tourists talk in English, it was easier for us. And then when eating, we proceeded to talk in Portuguese. And then I heard a regular-looking French family say, "Damn Portuguese, they're all dirty and thieves, and so poor. I bet they had to work for like 2 years just to come here." And other insults along the lines that all Portuguese women are prostitutes, etc. When we left, I said in the most perfect French accent I had to the father, who was like 30 years old, "Dame, you should have seen his face. I did not know French people thought of us like that." Seriously, it left me wondering, what the hell do we Portuguese people do to be seen like this? Story 13. My ex-girlfriend was from up in the hills and spoke Welsh as her first language. She spoke English pretty well with me, but sounded like an 8-year-old with a learning disability. When I first met all of her family at a Christmas do, I overheard her teenage brother slagging me off in Welsh, thinking that I couldn't understand what they were saying. I'm quite a big guy, and one of them was bragging to his brothers about how he would knock the English prick out with one punch. I walked over to him, squeezed his arm, and said in Welsh, "With those girly arms? No chance." The other two brothers cracked up and were giving him grief. He just went red and apologized.